So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a simple calculation, and that calculation is the risk amount in US dollars divided by the stop loss amount in US dollars. Okay, so we're going to do risk amount divided by the stop loss amount. And that will tell us the overall position size in Bitcoin or whichever asset that we're currently trading. So we'll take the calculator out and we'll figure out how to go about this calculation. So it's very, very easy. So we're going to go on a $10,000 trading account using 1% risk, which is $100 risk on this particular trade. We'll take the $100 and we're going to divide it by the stop loss amount, which is the lower left-hand figure here. I can't really hover down that far, but as you can see, the stop loss amount is $67.30, which is a 0.25% risk according to TradingView. Now, that number may throw a lot of people off, the 0.25% risk. Don't worry about that. That's besides the point. We don't care about that number going forward, okay? We're only looking at the US dollar size of the stop loss itself. So in this case, we'll divide it by $67.30. And we're going to round up a little bit here. We're not going to take the entire figure. I'm going to take the first 4 decimal places here. You don't have to take the whole thing because that's crazy. So we'll take the first 4 decimals, and this is the notional size of the trade in Bitcoin. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to multiply that figure, 1.4858. We're going to multiply that by the value over here, the entry value, which is 26587.2. And the reason why we're doing that is we want to figure out which leverage to apply in this position first of all before we do anything further. So in this case here, this is the figure. Of course, we had to round again. So this is the number that we end up with. What that tells me is that using a $10,000 account, I'm actually going to divide this number by 10,000. But using that $10,000 account, this is the leverage that we would have to apply to open this trade in the first place. It's not possible to open this trade with less than 4 times leverage. With leverage, you always have to round up. So no matter if it's 3.99999, you still have to round up to 4 because to my knowledge, there aren't any exchanges that allow you to use decimal points in the leverage. So we know this is a 4x leverage trade. So what we're going to do next is we're going to make sure this math works, right? We want to make sure this works. I want to show you guys that this works, right? You're not just going to trust me that, hey, this is how you enter position and that the risk reward multiplier is indeed the multiplier times the risk. So if it's $100 risk on the trade, this trade should net $400. But how do you know that? Well, let's do the math and let's figure that out. So in this case here, again, we're going to multiply this figure by the entry price, which gives us this figure over here. Okay, that's how much in US dollars the position is worth, leverage included. So we have the $39,503.26 at entry. Well, let's also multiply this figure here by the exit price. So 1.4858 multiplied by 26856.5. Okay, so the Bitcoin amount of the trade multiplied by the exit price. Okay, and that tells us what we need to see. We're going to round up again. We're going to go with decimal 39 instead of decimal 3877. So we'll take that number, we'll erase the figure, and we'll go with the 9. There we go. So that is what the position is worth at this price. So now take these 2 figures and subtract. So subtract the entry price, 39,503.26, and that should give us $400 if you did the math perfectly. So I rounded, therefore the decimal 13 popped up. Okay. Now, again, this does not include fees. You will have to add that in yourself later on, obviously. But that tells us that the risk reward multiplier is indeed correct. So for risk reward is the multiplier times the risk itself in US dollars. This is very good to know because we don't have to guess anymore. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of the equation, right? You don't have to rely on silly calculators that are on these exchanges. You actually know how much you're risking and how to get ahead, right? You're able to actually properly compound. We'll actually take a look at properly compounding and how effective that can be. But before we do that, let's give an example of using proper risk management. So let's say that we have a 4% trade planned out, but we don't want to walk away empty-handed though. So there is a method that we can apply. It's a very basic tactic and it works really well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take out 50% of the trade at 2R or 2 risk to reward. So halfway down would be here. I can't get it exactly to 2 apparently, but we're going to get close enough. So that's half the halfway point. So what that tells me is that if we cut out half the trade rate there, first of all, we'd be up $200 here. That'd be a plus $200 gain. That's what it would say in our P&L shot if we were to enter on $100 risk using that math. So for plus 200 or 2% of that $10,000 account by the time price gets here, and we cut out 50% of that trade, we just secured 1%, or rather $100. We locked in $100 or 1% of that trade. That's locked in. So what that means is we can now move our stop loss to break even. And in a worst case scenario, if price comes down, tags us in, comes up to that line, we hit our limit order, take profit, price comes back and takes us out of the trade, we're not walking away empty-handed. We're still walking away with a 1% compounding gain on our account balance. This is a very effective tactic to grow your account. Right? That's just one example as to how risk management can be applied. You can use many examples. There are many, many different tactics. You can use market structure. You can use supply and demand. You can base it off of liquidity. I would have to say, though, that market structure is going to be the primary thing that tells you how to de-risk a trade. And it all depends on how the market flows. So in this case here, if structure were to come down, hit the limit order, come back up and break structure bullishly from a local perspective, of course, an internal local perspective. And then it comes down, makes a higher low, makes a higher high, higher low, higher high towards that high up here. And we see something like this before the final take profit occurs. Then what does that tell you? Well, that tells you that your stop more than likely should have been up here, right? If you're playing it safe, then your stop loss should have been right here and you should have been taken out on the rest of the trade, which would have netted you a total of $240 on that trade, or 2.4 times the $100 risk on that trade using the risk to reward multiplier. So let's take a look at how compounding can be